maximize everyone's time. Thank everybody for joining us. This is the policy committee of ICSD. We may be taking on some additional policy work as we work through the policies today. We'll find that out in a minute. But the first item is public comments. And so I see we have a couple folks joining us and didn't know if there was any public comments. So please feel free.
Okay, Sean, I've made everyone a co-host, so
okay,
they can unmute.
Yep.
There we go.
Fantastic.
Great. So my name's Stephanie. I'm a student at Ithaca College. I sent a few of you an email talking about, I basically am just trying to learn about how curriculum sort of works at the ICSD. And yeah, I know you guys are all busy people. And yeah, I'm just looking to learn a bit more about it. If any of you are willing to talk to me, I'll put my contact information in the chat and you can reach out. I would appreciate it. Or any contacts with anyone who can just teach me a little bit about how curriculum works at the ICSD.
Excellent. Stephanie, a follow-up question. Is this something you're doing as an academic project, at a personal interest, for a local news organization? I'm just trying to get an idea of how we're approaching this.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's for my investigative journalism class. And I will be planning on putting it on my portfolio for considerations for future internships and jobs and that sort of thing.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, thank you for joining us. Policy tries to be very clear and not step on the boundaries of our curriculum committee, but that will be happening in 2 weeks, right? So every 2 weeks, there's another committee that happens. So not next week, not on the 12th, but on the 19th. Actually, I'm not even sure about the 19th because of the spring break. But I'll find that out and I'll send you an email in terms of when our curriculum committee will be meeting next, just for your information.
I would very much appreciate that. Thank you.
Yep, and it's in the chat. Thank you, Lily. The next curriculum committee will be on April 26th. Appreciate it, Lily. Any other public comments, announcements? All right. Any committee responses?
I'm Pat Wasloo, Stephanie. I don't know if I was one of the people you emailed. I have not seen an email from you in either of my inboxes. I just took a look. So just letting you know, I'm not sure I received it and that's fine. But you're welcome to resend if you want.
I actually didn't reach out to you. Would you, I'll send my email in the chat if you want to talk about it.
Great.
Oh, sorry, you're muted.
I'm having a weird problem with my chat that I have to get fixed. So I cannot read or respond in chat. Don't even ask. It's something that can only happen to me. And I'm going to get my kids to fix it or someone younger at work.
Okay,
fantastic,
sure.
Fantastic. Just reach out directly. You can find all the email messages for all the board members on the ICSD website. So if you go there, there is a section for board members and it also includes email addresses for all board members.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
The next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes from our March 1st meeting. Didn't know if anyone had any things to change. Any questions about the minutes?
I didn't get a huge amount of time, but they're okay by me.
Me too.
Yeah, especially since they usually just include transcripts. As long as they have the disclaimer, they're good by me as well. So we will approve those. And we don't have it on here about adding agenda items, but before we go to our discussion items around our Title IX and harassment policies, I'm also wondering if we want to have a quick conversation about a policy that Moira reminded us of, which is policy 5160, the comprehensive attendance policy. And not that we need to have a dialogue about it immediately. Lily, great response in terms of how we're approaching our attendance, particularly at the secondary level. Thank you for that. But it also raised some questions for me about making sure the board is not overextending itself and trying to provide as much support as possible. So we can come back to that when we talk about action items, if that works for the policy committee colleagues. In the meantime, we began having this conversation, and we can also put it in the chat as well. Lily, I believe we have a Google Doc that's available for folks to take a look at. Before I do that, let me also back up. Steve, my apology for identifying you or calling you out. I didn't know if there's something you want to say, or you're just here to participate in the excitement that we call policy committee.
Thanks, Sean. No, I'm actually here because I saw the agenda and my daughter had a not great experience a few months ago. So interested in listening in on the conversation. No comments right now.
Thanks, appreciate it, Steve. So we began our last policy committee by having a conversation of taking a look at the litany of policies that are in the policy book. Some of them are outdated. There's a conversation about making sure we delete one of them. Some of them overlap. Some of them are both redundant and incomplete at the same time. So we decided that we were going to have a much more in-depth conversation during this committee meeting. There's a couple of questions that I have as well. And not to put Lily on the spot, but I don't know if there's a direction that you wanted us to go in, Lily, that would be most helpful for the work that's being done for both Lily and Mary.
Thanks, Sean. Mary, I'll jump in, and then if you want to jump in as well, that sounds great. I think last time we discussed the possibility of the board policy folks who are I would say extremely thoughtful and quite brilliant when it comes to ensuring the words match our message, otherwise known as wordsmithing, that it would be helpful to go through at least one of the policies together or get as far as we can through some of them. And then that will allow me and Mary to take to understand the tenor and your intention moving forward, to do some initial edits and track changes between now and the next meeting, so we could really continue the momentum and ensure that we're cultivating a collection of policies that both ensure a level of protection for young people and staff, and those associated with the ICSD, and also ensure a level of affirmation, I think, for folks in our community.
Mary, did you want to add to that as well?
No, Lily said it well. I'm excited to get to work. Thank you.
Great. To make sure that we feel like we have accomplished something today, because our wordsmithing can sometimes bring us for a little bit of time, more than we want it to. I would recommend that I'm asking my board policy colleagues to see if we want to make a determination about the deletion or recommending the deletion of policy 9110.2. It was adopted in 1984. It has not been addressed. There are other policies that we have put on the policy books that address the things that were in this policy, probably much more in keeping with current regulations. So my humble ask would be if we could go to agenda item 4.3 and see if we can have a quick conversation about sending policy 9110.2 to the full board for our next agenda item for deletion. So Moira and Pat, any thoughts, ideas, questions, comments about that action?
Makes sense to me. I'm looking at the document that just lists the related Title IX policies. So what's the difference between 9110.2 and 9110.3? I think we talked about this last time, but I can't remember.
One of the differences is about 34 years.
Oh,
That's one of the main differences, right? Or and maybe my math may even be off there. What we were doing, and Moira and Pat, you were both on the committee as well. At one point in time, we were trying to play catch up to make sure we were in sync with current regulations, and that was the reason for the adoption of 9110.3. And we did not take any action on 9110.2. It's fairly small. There's nothing there that if we felt needed to be someplace else, we could put it someplace else. But as a standalone policy, I don't think it's in keeping with the rest of what we've been doing in other places.
So I have just briefly, quickly scrolled down all of the policies that Lily sent to us, and at the bottom got to 9110.2 and opened it, and you know, it's very bare bones. I don't see anything in it that is not covered more thoroughly, comprehensively, and adequately in other policies, including 9110.3. So I think it was just an oversight on our part not to take this out and retire it. And I would totally support moving this to a board agenda for removal. Removal is obsolete, as redundant and obsolete.
right.
Moira, and you as well?
Yes, absolutely.
And Moira, if you want to know some of the specifics about how it's different, I can give the 3-sentence version.
Okay. Just
Okay.
Please do, Lily.
So in 2018, the law changed and requires all New York State organizations that employ 10 people or more to ensure they have a comprehensive policy and also have a training for all employees that occurs every year.
right.
The policy itself is much more expansive and really clarifies everything from sexual harassment and assault to sex discrimination that is inclusive of the gender spectrum.
Mhm.
And another big change is that it clarifies sexual harassment and sex discrimination. Either it may have the intent or the effect of violation.
Uh-huh. So when we delete 9110.2, would we also renumber 9110.3 and just make it 9110?
Well, there's a 9110.5 that I wanted to ask a question about, because this is also extremely short. It's from 1996. It was last revised in 2007. But this is this is a very, very specific anti-discrimination clause against one group of people, and it mentions fringe benefits for employees. And I would like to see this information, this policy incorporated into something that more broadly, if it's not, I mean, I think the discrimination the anti-discrimination clause has to be in multiple places. And if the fringe benefit aspect needs to be somewhere else, I would support getting rid of this one too, as long as we're covered, and then just having a 9110.
So we'll have to spend some time talking about this, and it may be this meeting, it may be another meeting. The 9110 series continues to grow and be expanded, one with multiple boards of education and multiple both federal and state regulations. So 9110 is currently the equal opportunity policy. It may also be outdated and it may be covered someplace else, so it's something for us to consider. 9110.1 is workforce diversity, which again is something that probably warrants our attention. And I am not sure if we have this covered as thoroughly as we would like in other places, but it also relates to 9110.6. And I apologize for all these numbers, which is non-discriminatory.
I've just clicked on that, and that was last revised 1999.
Yes. So what I'd like to do is maybe we put on the agenda for our May meeting as we spend time having a much more thorough conversation about 9110 and all corresponding policies. It still does not stop us from go ahead and taking the measure of deleting 9110.2, because most likely that's where we're going to end up when we go through the entire series anyway. But however we want to do it, if we want to hold on to them and keep them all together, but I don't want to get distracted from the work that Mary and Lily want us to do, which is to review and wordsmith one of these policies so we give some indication of at least the direction that we're headed in keeping with current expectations and regulations.
I agree with that approach to table 911.5 and 9110.6, but 9110.2 is, I think, clearly covered by 9110.3.
Yeah.
All right.
A work environment free from sexual harassment.
So
All
Tricia,
employees.
if we can, sorry, my apologies.
I'm done.
Tricia, if we can put 9110.2 on the agenda, our upcoming board meeting for deletion. Bob, I'm also going to ask you to take a look at these policies. A good number of them are related to HR and the ways in which we are creating and affirming all employees. And so taking a look there would be great. And I'll follow up with Lily and Mary about 9110 and all the decimals. Maybe we can just say it that way and go from there. Perfect. So if that works, then we'll do that. In the meantime, we have 5020.1, which is sexual harassment of students. Why don't we open it up, go through. I am certain there are things here that, again, we may have to add, but at least we can start having a conversation about what would be the most useful and some of the language that we may want to use. Thoughts, comments? Wow, and I'm just also looking at 5020, which is equal education opportunities, and it's poorly worded. Equal education opportunities harassment of students.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's the title that we want. So we'll come back to that one if we have more time today. But let's just begin and start with 5020.1, and I can put it in the link if I have not done so already, or send the link. It's also in the document that Lily did. I don't know if it's helpful for folks to share a screen so we can sort of wordsmith together. what is the best approach for folks?
I've got it. Well, I have a second screen, so I've got it called up on my second screen. So whatever other people want to do is fine.
Maura?
Is it, so what we would be looking at on a shared screen is the same as what's currently in board docs?
No, yes, or the Google document is what we'd be looking at. So
okay.
folks can see the changes there. So if you have
Okay.
multiple screens, that second link I just put in that Lily and Mary created to give us a number of things, but it'd be 5020.1. And we're at least a dozen years past this last revision from this policy.
So my question would, two questions would be, first of all, foundational questions. Has there been any change in the definition of sexual harassment since this policy was last revised in 2009? And have there been, I mean, I know there have been changes in the way the district has handled allegations of sexual harassment since 2009, but what does the administrative team see as being immediately problematic or outdated in this policy?
Pat, I think we'd likely want to pull from, I'm sorry to go back to it, but 9110.3, the newer, the 2018 sexual harassment of employees definition. I think that's going to be the most up-to-date, the most NISBA friendly, the most legally sound.
And we need to have sexual harassment policies in both the 5,000 and 9,000 series. One is
possibly,
and the other is broad.
5,000 policy series is usually student focused. The 9,000 policy series is personnel and employees.
Okay.
Okay.
So back to our glory days, if okay with folks, I'll do my best to try to read the first paragraph and see what we want to keep and what we may want to change.
Okay.
And talk about how things have changed. There you go. Wow, that's a game changer. The Board of Education is committed to safeguarding the right of all students within the school district to learn in an environment that is free from all forms of sexual harassment. The Board of Education condemns and will not tolerate sexual harassment. Further, sexual and gender-based conduct and comments that the district finds are inappropriate will not be tolerated, regardless of whether they rise to the level of actionable sexual harassment. Reactions, thoughts, comments so far?
I'm not sure how I want to put that. A question is the tone of this what we want?
It's definitely policy tone. It's probably not the
Yeah.
way in which we've been trying to rewrite some of our policies.
Right.
And I would probably say we have some other policies that we can, as Lily has recommended, that we can borrow the language that we've already worked on and spent some time on. So if I can find it real quick, and I apologize.
Which isn't to say, that a strong statement about what we won't tolerate is, I'm not saying that I don't think that that's appropriate.
So I'm trying to toggle back and forth between 9110.3 and 5020.1 to pick
Yep.
up on Lily's remark that we might want to borrow some language from here. So obviously a lot would have to be changed, but we could substitute the language of the work environment to the educational or learning environment. I think a lot of the definitions of sexual harassment could be appropriated for 5020.
Yep. Can I ask two questions as I'm looking at this? One, and I don't know what other districts have done. I'll check NISBA in a minute, but I'm wondering if even the title is what we're interested, is that's the title we want to have. I realize it makes it easier to find, but it doesn't, for lack of a better word, take a position, right? It's sexual harassment of students, and so
Right.
it is what it is, and maybe that's what we want as well. And we know we've been having conversations that most of our policies have been written from a place of defense to provide protection for the district. I'd be much more interested in a policy, particularly in this situation, that is much more understanding of what happens and how we need to provide support. And I don't know what that looks like and what that language looks like, but something that I was thinking about more when you say, does it capture the tone we want? And the answer is no, for me, it's not the tone that I would want to communicate.
Well, we do
And-
in 9110.3, there's a general introduction of a work environment free from sexual harassment, and that it's one component of a district's commitment to a discrimination-free work environment, but we also have a discrimination-free learning environment. And then under policy, subset 2 says sexual harassment is not tolerated by the district and is prohibited by this policy. So it's a different format, but it is actually a lot of the same tone.
The only thing I would ask, and this is both for Lily and for Mary, this policy makes a point as currently written that provides the district the opportunity to condemn actions, whether they rise to the level of actionable sexual harassment.
Right.
I'm wondering, what does that do? What does that provide for us? What does that do for the district? And I don't know if the question makes sense, and if not, I apologize. And it's this sentence right here. I don't know if when I highlight it, if folks can see it.
It's a good point, Sean.
Well,
Sean, oh, go ahead, Moira.
well, why don't you go ahead, Lily? I was just gonna probably say what my understanding is of what you've already said about this issue. So go ahead.
So Mary and I meet regularly with a group of students from Ithaca High School, along with Lynn Stack from the Advocacy Center and Kara Burney from Planned Parenthood. And I would say repeatedly, the students have indicated that clear messages from administration and staff about how sexual harassment and sex discrimination and gender discrimination, gender identity discrimination are not acceptable, feels really supportive. They are also really clear that I would say, Mary and please correct me if I'm wrong, they also understand that there's significant racialized and racist history associated with zero tolerance policies, especially around sexual harassment, and how there has been a long history around quote unquote protecting white female bodies at the expense of Black male bodies. And so they think it's important to clarify both and. They're an amazing group of children. They're phenomenal people.
It's making me think that this is probably an example where we shouldn't be doing this policy in isolation. Given it's making me think if that's the complexity with which students are exploring the topic in both historic contexts and around notions of power, that we may want to continue to ask for, just for the conversation, not put this weight on them. They don't have to bear this burden, but the dialogue could be useful for us in terms of how we approach it as well. When do you all meet? I'm just curious.
We meet again on Thursday, right, Mary?
Yeah, Thursday. And I want to echo that it is one of the best meetings I have every week because of the level of conversation, and their criticality is well, it's really inspiring and thoughtful. And I love the idea of engaging in the conversation with them without burdening them with the task. I like how you put that.
Pat, and were there any thoughts?
I feel like I'm talking too much. I'm going to say one more thing. A strategy
You are
that
not
Mary and
talking
I,
way too much.
Mary and I have found that has been effective, that the students have indicated they're okay with, is we do some groundwork and create drafts and create ideas, etc., and then they make them better. That's another possibility too.
Yeah,
All right.
I like that idea. I mean, one thing, I just, a kind of general comment that I think I've made before, I struggle with what we need to have in terms of policy, and particularly, what we are legally required to have in terms of policy, and what is actually useful to students and to everybody who are, involved in trying to address the issue. So the students who are experiencing it, and the staff and administrators who are trying to, make it better. So that's, that would definitely have a style and a tone that might be very different from what, the road that we have to go down to meet our legal requirements for policy.
So I think what we can do is similar to our students is come up with a draft and then run it through BS&K to make sure that we are in keeping with what the expectations and the legal requirements are. And sometimes that's happened to us when we've written something a particular way that there may be a little bit of confusion. And so we may do that. So I think that's a great idea as well, to make sure that we are keeping with what we are required to have, as well as trying to rethink some of these things to make sure the district is clear about what the learning environment we are creating, as well as what happens afterwards. And so just as an example for me, when I read this first sentence, I have a reaction to it, and probably because of the word safeguarding doesn't sit well with me. It probably, it has some sort of stance. And so I would be wanting and willing to rewrite this in a way that is maybe shorter and to the point, but still keeps the main concept open. And my apologies for just as I'm redoing this real quick. And I'm not sure we need to say within the school district that the Board of Education is committed to the right of all students to learn in an environment that is free from all forms of sexual harassment.
Yeah.
Like, for me, short and to the point. So I don't know
Right.
what folks think of that.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
definitely.
I
better.
think that's good. And I think, I don't know if you can provide this for me, for us. I would like this either now or in the future when we go through this, would be to maybe just highlight or call out those portions of this policy that do in fact go beyond what we are mandated to do legally, just so that we know how our approach might be in addition to or an enhancement of our legal obligations. And the legal obligations, I don't know, maybe you can use different colors or something. Those are things that we can't take out, but what we're doing in addition, is it enough? Does it promise more than we can actually deliver, which I recall was a big stumbling block for a lot of the things we wanted to say with special education policies, is can we really deliver what, if we say we ensure this, well, does that put us in a difficult situation? So, what is the law? What is what we are attempting to do in addition to what is required by New York state law? And is that in fact best practice, what we should be doing, given that this was written so long ago and revised a dozen years ago?
We are happy to color code that. Noted. It's a good idea.
I just think it's difficult for us to do any kind of wordsmithing, debate any clause that is legally required. I mean, we talk about whether we are using the right words, but if we're going to do any significant changes to that, I would need that.
And we can tell you in general, definitions and clarifying the response are going to be key. So we have to define it as per the most recent legal updates, right? So that idea around especially what I was talking about in terms of the gender spectrum and understanding intent versus impact, or right. Yeah.
So Lily, does that mean keeping with federal Title IX definitions or statewide definitions?
Actually don't know.
Okay.
I'm the state and federal definitions are pretty well aligned.
Yeah.
And I would think the federal definition would be the dominant.
Okay.
Just so I can get a handle on how often this policy is called into action. Do we have, how many charges, incidents, let's say, like, I don't know, in a year, at what level are you seeing? I would think you'd see more at middle school and high school than elementary school, but maybe that's just an assumption on my part. And how prevalent is this issue on the ground?
Pat, in terms of the data that we collect it in a few different ways. And with many incidents that occur, there may not be a central place, right? So we use our student information system school tool, and there may be referral data that indicates a violation as per the code of conduct. And some of the codes in the current code of conduct are, I would say, more perhaps extreme. That I don't think that's exactly the word. You know, when it comes right down to it, filling out a referral and clarifying which of the codes a student has broken or violated, there is some gray that folks may select, right? So, and I'm sorry, I'm not being super clear about that. Maybe Mary can say it in a different way, but so there's school tool and there's violations in our referral system. That's not always where people code a violation of this policy, right? At elementary school, we might use this, which is understanding children's sexual behaviors. And that may not go into school tool at all. We may be using the spectrum that's listed in this. We have copies in every school. It may turn out to be a note in school tool. It could be a note home, a phone call, a classroom meeting, right? And those, so tracking this, I would say, is challenging and frankly not something we're particularly focused on, honestly. I can give you some anecdotal information as the Title IX coordinator. Last month, I had 3 investigations that I had to complete. The month before, I had 1, right? It just totally depends. There's some months when it's 5, and there are some when it's 0.
Well, that actually gives me a good idea of the level of, well, reporting, investigating, and remedying allegations of sexual harassment, which is called for in the last full paragraph here. And consistent. I mean, maybe those of us who have never run across this particular, like a concrete example of this particular issue, could benefit from a brief discussion of how an investigation is, the ways in which an investigation could be launched, and the various avenues that it could play out. Because it's difficult for me to craft a policy in the large picture without really knowing how reflective what we're putting in is of what's needed and what is helpful and productive.
So that may be something for us to, we can have that conversation, and part of that is also in the Title IX policies and procedures, the document that came out, and we can take a look there as well. This is me adding my quick opinion, and my experience is whatever data we have is significantly underreported. So, if we have 3 investigations, we know it's potentially more than that. And I apologize for using this as a data point, but we are trying to have a conversation with our grandchild about microwaves and finding out research that in 1980, 10% of families had microwaves, but in 1997, 90% of families, your US households, had microwaves. And I mentioned it to say this policy was written in 2009, well before the advent and the overwhelming use of cell phones and social media. So what we're also talking about is how do we create a policy that is keeping up with the times. And I know we already have this issue around a host of areas about social media, including the debate between in school and out of school as well. So I know it gets complicated, but to Pat's point, I don't know, Lily, if you're if this is something that you can do right now, but to give a quick brief rundown what happens if there's a report made and what the investigation, how it typically works. And I know each case is completely different. So if there's something we want to come back to next month as well, we can also do that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk through it. So the training for administrators and what Mary and I do is we immediately, as soon as we learn of a situation, we must put in place protections for the person who has reported being on the receiving end of the violating act. So that may mean that the person who allegedly engaged in the violating act needs to not be in the space, right? Needs to spend a day at home, et cetera, while we engage in the investigation. Which again can present some odds for us, right? Because we're trying to also build a restorative culture. So I also understand that. And yet that is our obligation. So that may look like the student going to a buddy classroom in a different elementary school classroom. It may mean that the kiddo who's on the receiving end or has reported indicates they're good. They don't want anything to happen right now. They feel like they're okay. It may be that we're having someone spend time away from the school. It may mean that we are immediately changing schedules, right? There have been times when it's been really obvious. There's immediate evidence. It's very clear. Sometimes there's a video, there's a chat message, proof, et cetera, right? So we have to gauge that and immediately put those in place. And then we engage in the investigation. And that investigation needs to be inference-free. And although we have put in place these protections for the person who's on the receiving end, we actually are required to not presume that the person who violated the boundaries actually did until we've completed the investigation. When we investigate, we talk with the students, we talk with any witnesses, we involve caregivers when that's appropriate, and we track those, we take copious notes. We have a shared folder where we put those as well, particular investigations, we collect evidence, etc. And then we ultimately make a determination, right? And move forward there. There have been times when we've engaged the code of conduct and suspended students for ultimately violating the code of conduct, because the sexual harassment policy works in tandem with the code of conduct. We also train all of our administrators to call the advocacy center and work with them as a partner. We say over and over that our job is to support and teach, right? It's to protect, support, and teach. And so there's a number of follow-up elements that we may engage in. So there may be additional counseling, there may be a series of check-ins, there may be classroom lessons that are shifting. There may be whole grade level meetings and trainings that we're doing for young people. Again, there's a real host of things in terms of follow-up. Sometimes there are systems of follow-up where, I have in my calendar that I follow up with a couple of particular students at the interval, which they have indicated is most helpful, and checking in terms of what types of supports that they feel like we need or want. There's, again, a whole range of possibilities from there. Is that helpful? Sort of lengthy.
Yeah.
Mary, what did I miss?
The one thing I would add, which you might have said, but I didn't catch, was the materials and support for caregivers as they're navigating this. So what's developmentally expected in a situation or with students of different ages is another follow-up. Those are typically given at the beginning of the year, but having that sent out and in sync with when the health curriculum is covering certain topics is another important piece that the Advocacy Center provides for us.
Can I ask a question, Lily, about the connection between what's needed in terms of protections being immediately put in place for the person who's on the receiving end, and when that includes, as you suggested, it may include having the alleged perpetrator, I'm sorry to use that language, but stay home for a day. How does that sync with having an investigation that's free from inference? So in other words, how is it communicated to the caregivers and the student? What is the reason for them being told to stay home for a day?
So we even just explained to them what the law is in regard to implementing those protections, and indicate that we're required to put immediate protections in place.
So you don't call it a suspension, you just...
Kate hates it, but typically we don't, right? We wouldn't yet, because there's no code violation yet.
Right.
So a question I would have specific to rewriting this code is where those of you who are implementing the procedures, where do you see gaps? Where do you see something that seems outdated? What should we be looking at to improve this, other than perhaps a change of tone? Like what are things that might be in here that are not needed? What is not in here that is needed? the point to policies should be to streamline the workings of the school and provide protections to all. How out of whack is this particular policy, or is it?
I'll interject and nowhere near an expert, but I'm mindful that we have 2 minutes before we have our upcoming next board meeting about budget as well. And I can tell you just from my reading of it, a good number of things do not line up with how we would approach it. The language is not consistent with language that we would use. It's not consistent with the way in which people even identify. That's my driveway alarm. You gotta love it. So that's part of it. And then what we can do is match this with the Title IX action steps that we have already been out and available for our district community to see on our website and use that. So I guess what I would recommend is that if it's okay with my policy colleagues, I'll follow up with Lily and Mary. The good thing is this policy is only 2 pages long, or a page and a half. A good portion of that is how we define sexual harassment. So we can update the definition, put this policy in line with what our action steps are for an investigation. Thank you, Lily. I forgot about, yes, there is a possible code of conduct violation as well. And thinking about that language, and also making sure that our new policy makes reference to using community partners. While we don't have to name folks, I think that's a really good idea as well. So if that's okay with Moira and Pat, I'll reach out to Lily and Mary, and we'll go from there in preparation for our next meeting on some of this we may do via email, but I just want to make sure that we're on the same page.
Yeah.
Does that work for everybody? Fantastic. For me, very helpful in trying to be able to frame what we're trying to do and understand the language and the approach. For Lily and Mary, thank you again to continue to remind us about sort of a restorative approach that also makes sure that provides protection for folks who are in need of protection as well. So we'll follow up with this. It is 6 p.m. I can put in the chat for anyone who needs it, our next meeting link, because we love Zoom so much. But here's where we're going for our next budget meeting. And with that, I'll bring our policy meeting to a close, and we'll see you all at the budget meeting.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.